Wine they served me cost more than the casket I'd buried my wife in 2 years earlier. And the woman pouring it leaned toward her husband and said, "Lo, like I was a piece of furniture. Look at him holding that glass. You'd think we handed him the keys to the place." She smiled at me when she said it. That was the part I kept coming back to later. She smiled right at me while she said it, the way you smile at a dog you're about to scold, certain it can't tell the difference between a kind word and a knife. I smiled back. I told her the wine was lovely. And I want you to know, before I tell you the rest, that I'm not a man who looks for trouble. I'm 68 years old. I've buried a wife and 2 parents and more friends than I care to count. I have learned, over a long life, that most insults are just fear wearing a nicer suit. So if you've ever been the quiet one in the room, the one people talk over and around and through, do me a favor and drop a little heart down in the comments so I know I'm not the only one. And tell me about a time somebody decided you were nobody. I want to hear it. But that night I just smiled and drank the wine, and I started keeping a list in my head. I've always been good with lists. It started with a phone call I almost didn't take. I was out back putting in tomato cages when the phone buzzed in my shirt pocket, my son-in-law's name on the screen. Brett. He'd married my daughter Hannah 3 summers back, in a ceremony I paid for, $240,000 all told, because Hannah wanted the lake and the band and the flowers flown in, and I'd have spent twice that to watch her happy. Brett had thanked me at the reception with a handshake and a joke about how he hoped I had a little something left in the tank. I let it go. You let a lot of things go when you love your daughter. "Cal," he said, that bright salesman warmth he turned on when he wanted something. "How's retirement treating you? Still puttering around in that garden?" "Tomatoes are coming in," I said. "What's the occasion?" "My folks are flying in from Scottsdale this weekend. We're doing a dinner Saturday, real nice place out at Cedar Hollow. They want to finally get to know you properly." He paused. It'd mean a lot to Hannah. I leaned on the fence and watched a cardinal work the feeder. Hannah didn't call me herself. She slammed Cal. "Work's been brutal." She asked me to reach out. Another pause, and this is the part I remembered. "Listen, my parents are kind of formal, old money, you know how it is. Maybe wear the gray suit to keep things light. They appreciate a certain quiet about a man. Quiet about a man. As if I'd been planning to stand on the table and crow. I told him I'd be there. I hung up and I stood in my own backyard a long time, and the thing that bothered me wasn't anything he'd said. It was the shape of it, the way he'd called to manage me like a delivery he wasn't sure would arrive intact. Here's what Brett didn't know, what none of them knew, and I'll be straight with you about why. For 31 years I bought land. Quietly. Drew holding companies with names like creek beds and ridgelines. Names nobody traced back to a man named Calvin Reeves who drove a 10-year-old truck and mowed his own lawn. I started with 1 parcel outside town and a loan I almost couldn't cover, and by the time I sold the operating side of it, I owned ground under shopping centers in 4 states. My wife Ruth and I agreed early, before any of it got big, that we'd never let it change how people treated us or how Hannah grew up. We wanted her to marry a man who loved her, not a man counting our acres. So we lived small and gave quiet, and told almost no one. Ruth used to say money was like a good foundation. You didn't want people staring at it, you just wanted the house to stand. When she passed, I kept the promise out of habit, and maybe out of grief. There was no one left to share it with, so my son-in-law thought I was a retired nobody who'd somehow scraped together a nice wedding. And I let him think it. That was on me. I'll own that. Cedar Hollow was the kind of country club that charges you to feel uncomfortable. Ballet, marble, a hush in the air like a library that served martinis. Hannah met me at the door and hugged me hard, and for a second she was 11 again, the girl who used to fall asleep against my arm on the drive home from her grandmother's. "You look handsome, Dad," she said. "Be patient with Brett's parents, okay? They're a lot." "I've handled a lot before," I told her. His parents were waiting by the windows. The father, Donovan, had the build of a man who'd never carried anything heavier than a golf bag and the tan of a man who made sure you knew it. The mother, Sylvia, wore her jewelry the way some people wear opinions, out where you couldn't miss them. They were developers. Big ones, to hear Brett tell it. Luxury lakefront, condos and clubhouses, the whole glittering business of selling people a view. "So you're the father," Donovan said, shaking my hand like he was testing fruit. "Brett tells us you were in, what was it? Postal, something with roots?" "Something like that," I said. I'd never been a mailman in my life, but I understood, right then, the story they'd been told about me, and I was curious to see where it went. "It's wonderful," Sylvia said, "how people find dignity in simple work." We sat, the wine came, the good Bordeaux, and Donovan launched into the project the way some men talk about their children. Tanner's Cove. 40 luxury units on the best stretch of Lake Norman shoreline they'd ever optioned. A marina, a clubhouse with a chef flown in from Charleston. "Biggest thing we've ever done," he said. "We're stretched, I won't lie, but when you're chasing trophy waterfront you go all in." He raised his glass. "Fortune favors the bold." I knew Tanner's Cove. I want you to understand how strange that moment was for me. I knew that stretch of shoreline the way you know an old scar. I'd looked at that ground myself 11 years back and passed on the dirt because the access road sat on a parcel I didn't control, and the parcel sat under a ground lease, and the ground lease was held by a holding company. I owned that holding company. I owned the ground their golden projects needed to breathe. They were building a 40-unit luxury development whose only road ran across land that belonged, through 3 layers of paper, to the postal worker drinking their wine. I didn't say a word. I just refilled my own glass and listened, and the list in my head started a new column. Then they began to talk about me like I'd left the room. It started small. Sylvia, to her husband, half behind her hand. "He's sweet, a little lost in all this." Donovan, not bothering to lower his voice much. "Hannah's a saint. Some people you just have to carry." Brett laughed at that. My son-in-law, the man whose wedding I'd paid for. He laughed and said, "Carries the word. You should have seen the budget on the wedding. Whole thing was a stretch for him, you could tell." Sylvia touched his arm like he'd said something fond. "Don't be cruel," she said, smiling, and then she leaned in and said the thing about the wine, that I held the glass like they'd handed me the keys. Hannah was at the other end of the table talking to a club manager about a sauce. She didn't hear it. I watched her not hear it, and I was glad. A man can take a lot more on his own behalf than he can stand to watch land on his child. I'll tell you what I felt, because I've had time to be honest about it. I didn't feel rage. Rage is loud and stupid, and it burns the man holding it first. What I felt was a cold, clean settling, like the first hard frost that finally kills the weeds. I had spent my whole life letting people decide I was small. I'd let it slide off me 1,000 times because it cost me nothing and it kept the peace. But these people had married into my daughter's life, and they'd looked at the man who made her, and they'd decided he was something to be carried, and they'd done it grinning, certain, comfortable in the belief that I was too dim to understand my own humiliation. So I made a different choice than I'd ever made before. I decided I would not say one word. Not that night. I would let them have their whole performance, every line of it, because a confrontation at a dinner table teaches nobody anything. People only learn from consequences they didn't see coming. I complimented the chef. I thanked Donovan for the evening. When dessert came, I asked him a few quiet questions about the project's financing, just enough to sound like a curious old man, and he answered me with that delighted condescension a certain kind of man can't help, explaining a bridge loan to me like he was explaining a card trick to a toddler. I learned more in those 4 minutes than he'd have told me in a deposition. They were leveraged to the eyebrows. Most of the equity was the parents'. The debt was short and getting shorter, and the whole thing rode on a road across my land that they didn't know was mine. At the door, Brett gripped my shoulder. See? That wasn't so bad. They like you, Cal. I told him it had been a memorable night. In the car I sat with the engine off for a while, and then I drove home with the radio quiet, and at the kitchen table I took out a yellow legal pad and wrote one line across the top. Remember exactly. And underneath it I wrote down everything they'd said, in order, word for word, the way Ruth used to write down recipes so they'd never be lost. When I was done, I turned the page and wrote, Monday, start. Then I went to bed, and I slept the best I had since the funeral. Monday morning I called Marv. Marv Kessler had been my attorney for 26 years, and he was the only man alive who knew the whole shape of what I owned. He's the kind of lawyer who answers his own phone and remembers your kids' birthdays. You sound like a man with a project, he said. I want to know everything about Tanner's Cove, I told him. Who holds the senior debt? Who holds the mezz? Where they are on the draw schedule? And I want to know who controls the access easement across the Quarry Ridge parcel. There was a silence, and then a low laugh. Cal. Quarry Ridge. That's you. That road's yours. I'm aware. Tell me this is what I think it is. It's not revenge, I said, and I believed it mostly. It's a correction. Marv went to work, and over the next 10 days I learned the bones of the thing. The senior loan on Tanner's Cove was held by a private credit fund out of the coast called Hatteras Capital. The fund was nervous. The project was behind schedule, over budget, and a covenant test was coming due at the end of the month that the developers were almost certain to fail. When you fail a covenant like that, the lender can do a lot of unpleasant things, but mostly what a nervous lender wants is out. They want their money back, and they want to stop losing sleep. They'll sell the note, Marv said. At a discount to the right buyer with the right amount of quiet. You want to be the right buyer? Set up a new entity, I said. Clean, not Quarry Ridge, not any name they could trace. Out of Wyoming. Get the EIN, open the account. I'll fund it by Friday. I thought a moment. Call it Birch Landing Holdings. Birch Landing buys the senior note from Hatteras, Marv said, thinking out loud now, the way he did when he liked a thing. When the covenant trips next month, Birch Landing's in the driver's seat. You'd control the debt and the ground under their only road. Cal, they'd be playing cards in a house you own, on a table you own, in a game where you deal. That's the idea. There's a cleaner way to make it land, he said. You know they're out hunting rescue capital right now. They're so over their skis they're begging for a white knight. What if the white knight is you? What if Birch Landing comes in not as a foreclosure, but as a savior? A quiet investor who wants to rescue Tanner's Cove. They'd court that money. They'd fall over themselves to impress it. He let it sit, and they'd never know they were impressing the man they called a postal worker. I looked out my kitchen window at the maple Ruth and I planted the year Hannah was born. Do that, I said. It moved faster than I expected, the way these things do once the money's real and the patience is genuine. Hatteras sold a note to Birch Landing inside of 2 weeks. They were that eager to be free of it, and I didn't quibble on price, which makes a nervous seller positively grateful. Marv had a colleague reach out to Donovan's people on behalf of a private investor exploring a position in distressed luxury developments in the Carolinas. Birch Landing Holdings. Discreet. Patient. Substantial. Donovan, Marv reported, was over the moon. They thought they'd been thrown a rope. The covenant tripped right on schedule, end of the month, just like the math said it would. A project like that doesn't fail because anyone's a villain. It fails because pride writes checks that lakefront views can't always cash. When the test failed, the developers needed a capital infusion to keep the senior lender from calling the loan. And the senior lender was now Birch Landing. And Birch Landing was now very politely both the problem and the only available solution. We let them feel the squeeze for about 72 hours. Then Birch Landing extended a gracious hand. We'd like to discuss a rescue investment, the representative said. Our principal would like to meet the family. All of them. A dinner, perhaps. Nothing ostentatious. I want to tell you about the week in between, because it wasn't all chess. Hannah came by on a Wednesday with a tin of the lemon bars she knew I couldn't resist, and she sat at my kitchen table and she cried a little, and she didn't fully know why. "Brett's been weird," she said, stressed about the project. "His parents are over at the house all the time and they talk about money like it's the only thing that's real. And the way they talk about you, Dad." She stopped. "I don't like it. I told Brett to knock it off." "What do they say?" I asked, gentle. She wouldn't repeat it. "That told me enough. They don't know you," she said. "They don't know anything about you." "No," I agreed. "They don't." And I almost told her then. I sat there with the whole truth on my tongue and the lemon bars between us, and I decided to wait, because some truths are better shown than said, and because I wanted my daughter to choose her father before she knew there was a kingdom attached to him. I needed to know she'd stand on the right side when she still thought the man on it had nothing to offer but himself. That was the hardest part. Harder than the money. Waiting to find out what my own child was made of. The dinner was set for a Thursday at a restaurant downtown with a private room, white cloth, a sommelier who knew how to keep his mouth shut. Birch Landing made the reservation. I told Marv I wanted to be there first, alone, with a glass poured and untouched. Then Brett called me. I'd been waiting for it. "Cal, hey, funny thing," he said, and I could hear the wince in it. "We've got this big investor dinner Thursday, real high stakes, kind of buttoned up. My folks think, and don't take this wrong, it might be better if it was just family that's, involved in the business." Atmospherics. This investor guy is supposed to be old school, very particular. We don't want any, he searched for it, misunderstandings. "You don't want me there," I said. "I didn't say that." "I'll make my own way," I said. "Don't worry about me." A pause. "Okay, sure, just keep it loose if you do come, all right?" "I'm always loose," I said, and I let him sit in that. Thursday I wore a darker suit than usual, well cut, the kind that disappears in a room until the moment you need it to do otherwise. I'd had it pressed. I chose cufflinks that didn't shine. Ruth gave them to me, the year we paid off the first loan, heavy little things, more weight than glint. I got to the restaurant early. I sat in the private room with a glass of Burgundy in front of me that I had no intention of drinking yet. And I waited, and I'll tell you, my hands were steady. After all those years of being small on purpose, I was about to stand up to my full height, and I was calm as a frozen pond. They came in together. Donovan first in his confidence and Sylvia in her jewelry, both of them already wearing the faces they wore for money. Brett behind them, working a smile that didn't reach anywhere. And Hannah last, my Hannah, looking lost, looking for me, not understanding why she'd been brought to a business dinner she'd been told all week wasn't for family. They saw the room, they saw the figure at the head of the table stand up, and then they saw it was me, and the whole performance just stopped, like a record lifted off mid-song. "Good evening," I said. "Please, sit down." Nobody moved. Donovan's mouth opened and closed. Sylvia's hand went to the back of a chair like the floor had tilted. "Cal," Brett said. What are you doing here?" This is the investor dinner," I said. "I'm the investor." I gestured to the chairs, easy, like a host. "Birch Landing Holdings. That's me, the principal you've been so eager to impress." I let that land. Then I slid a single folded sheet of paper to the center of the table, toward Donovan, and I sat back down. "Before the food comes, you should read that. It's a capitalization summary. It's not a threat. It's just where things actually stand." Donovan picked it up the way a man picks up a phone he's afraid of. I watched his eyes move down the page, and I watched the color leave his tan. "You assumed I couldn't understand you," I said, and I kept my voice level and quiet because the quiet is where the weight is. "At that dinner at Cedar Hollow, you sat across from me and decided I was a simple man you'd have to carry. And you said so to each other while I poured your wine. That was your first mistake." I tapped the table once. Your second mistake was thinking the things you can't see don't exist. You couldn't see that the road into Tanner's Cove runs across ground I've owned for 19 years. You couldn't see that I bought your senior debt 3 weeks ago for cash. You couldn't see any of it, so you decided it wasn't real. The number on that page is real. Read the bottom line out loud, Donovan. Go on. He didn't want to. His hand shook. Senior position, he read, barely audible. Held by Birch Landing Holdings. Access easement Quarry Ridge parcel controlled by Birch Landing Holdings. He looked up. You own the road. I own the road, I said. I own the debt. The covenant failed Tuesday. As of right now, gentlemen, I'm the most important person at Tanner's Cove. And 3 weeks ago you were laughing about whether I could afford a wedding I'd already paid $240,000 for. Sylvia found the voice, thin and trembling. This isn't how business is done. It's exactly how business is done, I said. On paper, in daylight, with a long memory. I looked at her, not unkindly. I've done business for 31 years, Sylvia. The only thing unusual about this deal is that I let you tell me who you really were before I told you who I really was. Hannah had been standing the whole time by the door, her hand over her mouth. Now she came forward slowly. Dad, she said, I don't understand the post office. There was no post office, sweetheart. My voice cracked just a little. Just there. Because she was the only person in that room I'd never wanted to deceive. Your mother and I kept it quiet. We didn't want the money to be the thing people loved about you or about us. I'm sorry I let it become a way for people to look down on me. That was my pride, the kind that hides instead of the kind that boasts. I held her eyes. I'm not hiding anymore. She turned to Brett. You told me he was a stretch. You told me he was a stretch. You told me the wedding was hard on him. You told everyone he was small. Her voice was very steady, which is how I knew she was furious. You knew nothing about my father, and you decided he was nothing. Hannah. Brett reached for her. This is business. This is your dad's playing a game. He's trying to. He's not playing a game, she said. He's telling the truth, and you can't stand that he had one. She stepped back from his hand. The food came then, the first course, the waiter setting porcelain down into a silence that had already broken something. Nobody touched it. I let it sit a moment. Then I leaned forward. And I want you to know I didn't enjoy this part the way you might think. I'd loved the idea of it for 3 weeks, and now that it was here, it just felt heavy and necessary, like lifting a stone off a grave. Here's where it stands, I said. I have no interest in scorching your project to the ground. I'm an old man. I don't need the trophy, and burning it down would hurt people who never insulted anyone. Your subcontractors, the families who put down deposits. So I'm going to save Tanner's Cove. I'm going to recapitalize it through Birch Landing, finish it right, and make it the development you couldn't quite afford to dream. I watched Donovan's face flicker between drowning and rescue. But I'll be the majority partner. The road's mine, the senior position's mine, and going forward, the standards are mine. There'll be real controls, real books. A man at the top who remembers that you finish a thing the way you'd want it done if your daughter lived there. And us? Donovan asked, hollow. You can stay, I said. You can learn how it's done by someone who built quiet and lasted. Or you can take a buyout and walk away clean and tell people whatever story lets you sleep. That's a real choice, and I'll honor either one. But the days of you carrying anybody are over. Nobody at this table needs carrying. Some of us just never made you notice the load we'd already lifted. Sylvia was crying now. The silent kind. The kind that comes when a story a person has told about themselves, their whole life, turns out to be wrong. I felt for her. A little. Pride is a hard thing to set down at 60 when you've leaned on it since you were young. I picked up my glass at last, the burgundy I'd let sit, and I tasted it. It was good. I set it down. Eat, I said. The food's getting cold and somebody worked hard on it. Brett didn't eat. He sat there a while and then he leaned toward Hannah and started talking low, fast, the way he did when he was selling. I couldn't hear all of it, but I could see the shape. We can fix this. Your dad's overreacting. Think about us. Think about our future. And I watched my daughter listen to it, and I watched her decide. I'm going to stay with my dad for a while, she said, loud enough for the room. I need to think about what kind of man I married and what kind of family I married into. She looked at Brett. You had so many chances to defend him, you never took one. Not because you couldn't, because you didn't think he was worth it. Hannah, don't make this dramatic. You made it dramatic, she said. The night you decided my father was somebody to laugh at. And she came and stood beside my chair, and she put her hand on my shoulder. And that, I'll tell you honestly, that was the whole win. The road, the debt, the cap table, none of it was worth what her hand on my shoulder was worth. I'd have given all of it back to feel that. We left together. I signed the check. Out on the sidewalk, the night air smelled like rain coming. And Hannah held my arm the way she had as a girl, and neither of us said much. We didn't have to. Brett came by the house 2 days later, uninvited, pressed and groomed and full of a different pitch. He stood in my front hall and told me, reasonably man to man, that I should sell my position back at a premium and walk away, keep it clean, keep the family whole. He told me I'd made my point. It wasn't a point, I told him. It was a lesson. You can keep it or you can keep pretending. Those are the only two things on the menu. If you push this, he said, lower now, you'll break the family. Think about Hannah. And from the kitchen doorway, where she'd been listening, my daughter said, Is that the plan, Brett? Use my love for my father to get him to fold? He didn't have an answer for that. He looked at me for the old man he'd needed me to be, and I kept my hands in my pockets and gave him nothing. And he left without slamming the door, which I took for the last shred of his dignity. The weeks after were quiet in the good way. Hannah stayed in the spare room that used to be hers, and we fell into a rhythm. Coffee in the morning, the garden in the evening, simple food eaten hot at the kitchen table that had held birthdays and a funeral, and 10,000 ordinary suppers. We didn't talk about lawyers much. She started looking at night classes. She'd majored in something practical once and let it go when she married, and now she wanted it back. I want to build something that's mine, she told me one evening, and I told her the truth, which is that you don't wait for momentum. You make it, one small thing at a time, the way you buy one parcel and then another. I never did scorch Donovan and Sylvia. I want you to know that. In the end, Donovan took a minority stake and stayed on, humbled in a way that I think did him some good. Sylvia took the buyout and moved back to Scottsdale, and we don't speak, and that's all right. I put real controls on Tanner's Cove and a whistleblower line, and I quietly set up a scholarship for the kids of the men who pour concrete and hang drywall, because if you want a thing to remember what it's for, you teach it to give something it can't put on an invoice. Ruth taught me that. People ask me sometimes, when I tell this story, whether I regret keeping it all hidden for so long, whether I'd have been spared that night at Cedar Hollow if I'd just let people know who I was. And I've thought about it. But I don't think the lesson was for me. I think I had to be underestimated one more time, all the way down to the bottom of it, so that my daughter could see clearly who valued her father when they thought he was nothing, and who only valued the road once they knew he owned it. So if you got people in your life right now who've decided you're small, who talk over you and around you and through you, I want you to hear me. You don't owe them a speech. You don't owe them your fury. The quietest people I've ever known were the ones holding the most, and they never had to raise their voices because the truth doesn't need volume. It just needs time and the long memory and the patience to let the proud finish telling you exactly who they are. Let me ask you something, and I mean it. I read every one of these. When somebody underestimated you, did you tell them the truth right away, or did you wait for the right moment, the way I did? Tell me down below. I've got my coffee on and Hannah's lemon bars on the counter, and I've got all the time in the world to listen now.